My name is Paige Rivard, and I'm the CEO of PWSA USA. And we're very excited to bring you the School Success Summit today. I know my 12-year-old son, who's living with the Prader-Willi syndrome, is in 6th grade. And I know our school journey has definitely been a learning curve for our family. And we continue to learn as we go. So we're happy to share the information and resources with you today in hopes that it will answer questions you may have and make your school journey just a little bit easier. We have a great lineup of speakers and topics throughout our 4 presentations today. So I think we'll get started, and these presentations will be recorded. They will be on our YouTube channel, will be on our website. You will get a link after the meeting that will also have the recordings in them. So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Ward, who is our Director of Family Support, and she will introduce our first speaker for today. Stacy.
Thank you, Paige. Just a couple housekeeping things before we start and I introduce Mackenzie. Today, I did leave the chat open for this presentation. So throughout the presentation, Mackenzie is going to ask a couple questions and ask that you guys respond back to us in the chat. So it is a webinar setup, so you will be able to hear us, but we won't be able to see you and you won't have the opportunity to speak. Therefore, putting your answers in the chat will allow Mackenzie to go forward with what she needs to present. We're also going to have Q&A at the end, so please add some questions into that Q&A box as well. The chat is going to specifically be used to respond back to Mackenzie throughout the presentation. So Mackenzie Bodin is a BCBA and the lead BCBA at the Atlanta Behavior Academy. She provides school consultation services in the greater Atlanta area. She also serves as a clinician supervisor, providing supervision hours to graduate students who are pursuing their board certification. She provides exam prep support services to those preparing to sit for the BCBA exam. Mackenzie has a bachelor's degree from Georgia College in special education and a master's degree from Arizona State University in education with an emphasis on applied behavior analysis. Prior to becoming a BCBA, she taught in a K-2 self-contained autism classroom. She's worked as a registered behavior technician in homes, in clinics, and in the school setting, and served as the ministry director of a special needs ministry at a local church in Atlanta, Georgia. Outside of this amazing professional resume, Mackenzie is the wife and a dog mom who loves to organize, do-it-yourself home projects, and play tennis. She resides in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband and their golden doodle fur babies. Mackenzie, if you want to take over and share your screen, we'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm so excited to be here today with you guys. All right. Let's see. All right, can everyone see my screen? I think so. Okay. All right. So I'm super excited to be here with you guys today. Today we're going to be discussing creating those IEP and BIP goals and really documenting the progress to make sure that they are successful. So I know Stacy did a great job introducing myself. Thank you for all of that. Education's my passion. So I have had a lot of experience in the education side, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys today. We are kind of right now at Atlanta Behavior Academy doing the school consultation side. We are supporting teachers, we're supporting the higher up staff members and admin, and really trying to get them to understand and really implement the IEP and the BIPs the way they need to, so that the student can be the most successful that they can be. So that's super exciting side of it. It's definitely different from my teaching side, actually being in the classroom and teaching, but definitely love it just as much. So today we have a lot to go through. This is kind of our main agenda points that we're going to talk about today. So I first want to start out with like a recap of just those important documents. So like, what is the IEP, the FBA, and those BIPs? Those are some acronyms that are kind of thrown around a lot in the education system and throughout everything that you hear in those meetings, and sometimes it can get a little confusing. So I kind of want to do a quick recap on those and what they are. Then we're going to jump into some data collection, how to take progress data and measure those behaviors that you are seeing. And then last but not least, looking at how to create effective and successful IEP and BIP goals. So again, before we get started on the data collection, we're going to go through some acronyms that we might see. And I'm just going to read these definitions, and then in the future slides, we're going to kind of go through some of the questions that these documents answer and what we can use them for and what kind of information is in them. So first is the IEP. And the IEP is a legal document that provides detail and special education instruction, supports, and services needed for the student to succeed in that school setting. An FBA helps us identify what is really maintaining that function. So that's also a functional behavior analysis or assessment. So what is those behaviors, those maladaptive, challenging behaviors that we are seeing? What is kind of our hypothesis for why those behaviors are happening? And then the behavior intervention plan, that's also known as the BIP. You will probably hear that a lot, that acronym a lot sometimes. But that states the interventions that are put into place to help improve the behavior that we want to decrease. So those acronyms are great, but where do we find them? So the IEP is that legal binding document. It can be upwards to like 17 pages, depending on the goals and how they're written. And within that IEP is that BIP. So if it's applicable for that student to have a BIP, that section will be kind of towards the end of that IEP. But in order to write and to have an effective BIP, you have to conduct an FBA. So we kind of think about it as kind of like the very beginning, where we take that data to kind of hypothesize why the behavior is occurring. So why are IEPs important? Well, as I stated in the definition, it is a legal binding document. So it is something that by law, anyone who is supporting this student or this child in the school setting, by law, you are mandated to follow this IEP. Now, if there's ever a time where you have to amend it or make a change to it, an IEP meeting can be done with the IEP team, and that those amendments can be made. But this is a legal binding document, and it states kind of where the student is currently performing and kind of some goals and some skills that we want to kind of teach and help that student access and kind of master so that they can be successful in the school setting. The IEP team that I mentioned, that is really anyone who's responsible for implementing the IEP, and it can include anyone from parents, caregivers, school staff, teachers, paras, and even those support services like such as OT and speech and therapists like that within the school. So an IEP includes, but is not limited to, again, depends on the state and what kind of information needs to be included. But these are kind of the main components that we're about to walk through now. The first one is annual goals. So we have the current progress, right? The current performance that they're doing, but now how do we make up either short-term or long-term goals that we can put into play and work on throughout that school year? And they have to be reasonable, right? And they need to make sure that we look at where the student's at, right? That current performance to see if they are able to reasonably achieve these goals throughout the school year. The next is any accommodations and modifications that need to be made for either district or statewide testing. So this could be some examples of like extra time or large print or someone reading it to them. This is a long list. I just included a couple just as some examples for you guys, but these will be stated in the IEP. Any related services. So these are the supports that are needed for that student to be successful in meeting those goals. So whether it's PT, OT, speech, even like adapted PE, anything like that, this will look different per state, but this will also include like the times and how many times a week or month that this mastery, I guess, time needs to be implemented within the classroom or the school day. Next is transition needs. So this is included in the IEP. This is mainly for, they kind of start at 14 years old, but this is for those post-grad school goals. So if a student is in school and they're kind of mastering out, so whether it's 21, 22 in your state, at 14, these goals can start being included, but this is really to help them post-grad. So the current performance that we've talked about. So where is the student currently performing based on observation? So whether a behavior interventionist has done an observation, teachers have done observations, parents, other stakeholders within that student's life, eligibility test and classroom test. Those can all be included into how to come up with the current performance. And the last one that we're going to talk about is how to use that progress. So how progress will continue to be measured throughout this IEP implementation. All right, so first chat answer, I'm going to pull up the chat. I want you guys to use the chat and just say yes or no, and you can even include the behavior. But I want to know, has anyone ever seen a behavior and wondered why it was happening? You can put yes, no, and then you can even mention what the behavior was that you saw. So this could be a behavior that your child, your student, a sibling, a spouse, or even a family member has been engaging in. All right, I'm seeing some yeses. For sure. A child hitting another student. Yep, that aggression. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Thank you so much for using the chat. So yeah, so this is when we see those behaviors, yep, tantrum, exactly. When we see those behaviors and we're wondering, hey, why is this happening, right? That is when we would conduct the functional behavior assessment, so that FBA. So the functional behavior assessment really answers two main questions. It prioritizes what behaviors we want to focus on right now in this moment, right? Because as being a school teacher myself, there's a lot going on in your classroom, right? And so it's really, really hard sometimes to kind of say, oh, well, Bobby's doing this and Sally's doing this, and there's just no way I can take data. And that's okay, right? We get that because it is impossible for you guys to take data on every single behavior and see every behavior. So we have to prioritize, right? Which behaviors do we need to focus on and needs to take priority right now? And the next one is, what is the possible function? And that FBA will help you come up with that. So now we're going to shift into BIPs. I promise we're going to come back to all of this, but I'm kind of trying to lay everything out for you. So that's an FBA. Those are those two main questions. What are the behaviors and why is it happening, right? And that helps us kind of prioritize. But then when we're looking at a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, again, we have to use that FBA to create that BIP, but a BIP does not exist without an FBA. I know I can't hear you guys, so I'm just going to trust that you guys are saying this with me. So I want to say this together because this is huge to remember. A BIP does not exist without an effective FBA. So if an FBA is not being done effectively or successfully or with integrity, then a BIP should not be put into place because we don't have that data that's accurate. So a BIP does not exist and should not exist without an FBA. So what is a BIP? A BIP just defines the challenging maladaptive behaviors. So it just puts definitions. Here is what Bobby's aggression looks like. Here is what Sally's tantrum behavior looks like. Because then again, we have to remember that the behaviors that we see, for each student or for each child might not look the same. My tantruming behavior might look a lot different than Bobby's, and Sally's her aggression might only be hitting, but Johnny's over there is actually hitting, kicking, and throwing items, right? So we have to make sure that those definitions are individualized for that student. Next is the hypothesis. So based on our FBA and reviewing that data, what hypothesis do we have for why this behavior is happening? And also including those positive strategies to help decrease and replace those challenging maladaptive behaviors. We never want to just decrease the behavior or try to attempt to without teaching this child or the student an appropriate replacement behavior. We don't want to keep telling them what not to do without telling them, hey, actually, let's do this instead. That part is crucial because that's what's going to make them successful. All right, so I have two little scenarios. So you guys are going to use your chat again. This is just yes or no. I'm going to read you a scenario and I want you to tell me if this is a maladaptive, challenging behavior that you think should be prioritized. All right, so the first one, this one's Bobby. Bobby is able to follow his school schedule to a T. He loves his visual schedule. He's also mastering his goals in record time. But he rocks back and forth in his chair constantly, all day long. He's rocking back and forth, even to the point where the legs on the chair, when it hits the ground, it makes some noises. Is the rocking back and forth a behavior that should or should not probably be prioritized? Which one? Should not. Yep. Great job. Yeah. No, great job. All right. That was an easy one, right? Yeah, because think about it. It's kind of like he is kind of he's still meeting his goals academically. He's still doing his work. He's still doing his schedule. But maybe it's just like a little sensory thing. Maybe he just wants to rock. Maybe it feels good to him, right? All right, what about this one? This one's Jimmy. Jimmy loves music and he does really well with communicating with his pet cards, his picture communication, exchange communication cards. But he also loves to look out the window. And he's repeatedly, all day long, going to the window, looking out. He does not complete his schoolwork because he's at the window constantly, right? He's like looking at the birds, the trees, right? The clouds. And then when the staff and the teachers try and go and transition him back to his desk to do his schoolwork, almost always it ends with a severe aggressive episode where it tantrums and it lasts around 30 to 40 minutes. Are these behaviors, so we're looking at like looking out the window, the hard to transition, and the tantruming behaviors. Do you think those should be prioritized? Yeah, should be. Yes. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. And I think the biggest thing, great job, guys. I think the biggest thing that we also have to remember is we have to, teach those replacement behaviors, right? So maybe even embedding in his schedule, hey, here's the time that you can look out the window, right? But also realizing when it's impeding the learning of the individual and when it's just kind of, I don't want to say like, because what's annoying, that's very subjective, but like sometimes we see behaviors are like, oh my gosh, that noise, I cannot stand that noise, right? But also it's like, that's more reinforcing for me to get that behavior to stop. And it's not about us, right? It's about the student. And we're looking at the student's success when we are in the classroom and we are at home with these students and these children. So we really have to look at how do we make them successful, but also, and when we do teach those replacement behaviors, they're probably going to decrease a little bit. So then we also get that reinforcement too, but that should be prioritized for them. Great job, guys. All right. So yeah, so those behaviors really are probably going to be the ones that we want to take data on, right? We want to start that data collection process. There is a lot of ways to measure data. We're going to quickly go through some of them. So frequency, for my teachers here, you're going to definitely hear some familiar phrases here. So frequency, right? That's just a simple count. That's just a simple, how many times did it happen? The tally marks. Duration is how long did it happen, right? So if you have a student who elopes out of the classroom, how long was he out of the classroom for? How long did they engage in the tantruming behavior? Maybe they're engaging in a lot of different behaviors throughout that tantrum. So I'm not going to take frequency on every time he tries to hit me or kick me, but I will probably do like the start to finish of how long he was tantruming. The rate could be simply frequency over count. You could do the first half of your day, the second half of the day, the full school day. How many times did Bobby engage in this behavior throughout the school day, right? So that could be just count over time. You could even do interval recording. So you could break up your day into 5-10-minute intervals and see how many intervals did Bobby engage in that behavior, or did he not? Latency, that's one that's not used very often, but it's definitely something that's important to know and to remember. So latency, I always think of like, how late is the student in responding to your demand, right? So if you tell, hey, Bobby, sit down, time to sit down, and then he just kind of stands there, you count that time to when he's actually beginning to initiate going to sit down. Because we want to shorten that, because think about generalization into the real world. When he does transition out and go to post-grad and someone asks him a question, we want him to, if he can, we want him to be able to vocalize back quicker, right? Because that's when his reinforcements are going to be met quicker. So that's definitely what we want to look at. And then IRT is also known as inner response time, and that's just the time in between each behavior. So if we're looking at tantruming behavior, we're going to look at the time between the first tantrum ended and the next tantrum began, because that time in between, if that's a small amount of time, that means the behavior is happening a lot, right? But if it's a longer amount of time in between, it could indicate that the behavior is happening less. And again, these are all kind of set up for teachers and parents who might have a lot going on, right? You guys have so much throughout your school day that you have to do, that it's literally sometimes impossible for you guys to see how many times Bobby actually kicked his chair, or how many times did Bobby actually hit his desk. Sometimes it's impossible. So frequency might not be appropriate. So a bunch of different measurement systems that you could use to measure that behavior. But the one that we're going to focus on today is ABC data. And ABC data is really the backbone and the core of that FBA. And like I said before, right? And we actually said it together, you shouldn't have an FBA that doesn't speak to BCB or to ABC data, right? Because if you don't have that effective BIP written, then if you do have an effective BIP, you have to have that FBA data. And that has to be where you pull that data from. So what is ABC data? You kind of hear that a lot. Sometimes in school systems that I see, it's like, it's called FBA data, but it's really ABC data. But what is that? So the A stands for antecedent, and that antecedent is what happens immediately before that behavior. So we're looking at, did you ask Bobby to sit down? So was that demand being placed right before the behavior occurred? So what is happening right before? The B stands for what is the behavior that is being targeted or observed? You guys named a couple in the chat. So aggression, hitting, or tantruming. Those are the behaviors that we're going to be focused on, right? Those are the ones that we're targeting. Those are the ones we're taking data on, we're observing. And then the last one is consequence. So what happens immediately after? So is the antecedent the same as a setting event? And you guys might not have heard of setting event yet, and that's okay. But if you guys do, if you guys have heard of setting event, do you think it is the same as an antecedent? So no, it's not. But what is a setting event? An antecedent is something that happens immediately before, and a setting event is something that happens before, but it's not immediately before. You're probably like, Mackenzie, what are you talking about? They both happen before, right? I'm going to give you some examples. But before we do examples, I want you to know that they're both important to know. So even though we might just be tracking the antecedent on the ABC data, we still need to probably be taking notes on some of the setting events that could be happening in your student or your child's life at that time of when we're seeing that behavior being engaged in. So they're both very important, but antecedent is probably what you're going to be tracking because it's the closest to that behavior. So some examples of antecedents is being told no, right? Denied access, adult attention, demand being placed, transitioning, and even being alone. Sometimes we see some behaviors and the parents or the teachers are like, he was all by himself in the corner. I don't know what happened, right? It could simply just be because he is alone. But setting events are medicine change, parents separating, maybe going through a divorce, a lack of sleep, trauma, a holiday. How many teachers out there? Mondays are probably always your worst days. And after spring break or a holiday is always worse. I'm telling you, I've been there. Yeah, it's the same. So, but that's definitely important to know, right? Because if we see an increase in behavior and it's right after spring break or it's right after the holiday break, Thanksgiving break, whatever it is, you're like, oh, that's probably why, right? Maybe their transitions out, their schedule was out of whack, or they weren't transitioning back well. But it might not be because of that medicine change. It's just like a variable that makes it more likely to occur. Again, both very important. Antecedent is what's directly tied to the behavior, though. All right, so let's check out some ABC data. So antecedent, a student is given an independent worksheet to complete alone. He rips it up. He rips up the worksheet. Para gets him a new worksheet to complete and the demand to complete that demand with a one-on-one help from the para. So he not only gets a new worksheet, but now the para is sitting right next to him doing the work with him. The next one, child is asked to clean his room. Tantruming begins. Now he's told that he can clean up his room tomorrow since he's a little upset right now, right? So that could be what some of the ABC data that you take may look like. So is the antecedent why the behavior occurs? We know it happens before. But do you think it's why the behavior occurs? Use the chat. Give me a yes or no. Is the antecedent why the behavior occurs? All right. I'm getting some mixed answers here. Yes and no's. All right, I'll wait a couple more seconds, see if anyone else responds. Great participation, by the way, guys. All right, so we got some mixed answers on that one. And it's actually not why the behavior occurs. This is actually a huge false assumption sometimes about the antecedent. It is what happens before the behavior, but it is not why the behavior happens. So why does the behavior happen? Why does it continue to happen? Even if we place a demand or even if we have a certain consequence, why is that behavior happening? We need to look at those consequences. Because if the student or the individual is getting what they want out of engaging in that challenging behavior, it will continue to happen. Always. Always the consequence. Antecedent, again, important to know. Continue to take data on that, but the consequences is going to tell us why that behavior could be happening. So why did we just go over all of that, right? That data collection, all of the ABC data, right? Well, because we want to look at it. We want to review it. We want to analyze it and say, okay, here's how many times this consequence happened. Here's how many times this happened. is there some correlation between the two? So we have to now take a look at those consequences, and those consequences are going to be also what we think of as the 4 functions of behavior. So there's going to be a lot of consequences that could happen, but they're always going to be in one of these 4 functions. And you can remember the 4 functions in this fun way of remembering that everybody eats. Eats is what we're going to remember. So the first one is escape. Attention, tangible, and sensory. Those are our 4 functions. So everybody eats. Escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. So let's check out some examples. Escape. This is the removal or the avoidance of an aversive activity. Attention can be both positive or negative. All attention, any attention is better than no attention for some kids. Tangible. This is a preferred item or activity. So it always can be an activity as well. We don't want to forget that one. And sensory is simply because you engage in this behavior only because it feels good to you. No one else has to be present. It is just you. You can do this on your own, and it is just because it feels good to you. So let's check out some examples. Escape. You provide timeout to a student or a client or even a child for crying during math times, whether it's math homework or in class, and they start crying. Okay, go sit back in the corner, go to timeout, go take a break, right? If that behavior continues, it could be the function of escape that's maintaining that behavior. Bedtime. Our parents out there, right? You probably, when you had your children, were probably young, right? And it was bedtime. They probably would come up with, right when it was time to go to bed, they came up with every excuse under the sun to not go to bed, right? They were still going to go to bed. So they didn't fully escape, but they could have avoided bedtime by saying, I'm scared, I don't feel good, I'm thirsty, but I want to read one more book, please, right? That's just avoidance. So it's just a delay of bedtime. But those all fall under the escape. Attention, saying good job after completing a worksheet, smiling and giving a thumbs up. So there's no vocal communication there. It's just a thumbs up and a smile. Or saying, no, we don't act like that at the store. So saying good job and smiling and giving a thumbs up after a student completed a worksheet or even answered a question correctly, that's praise. And then the reprimand is still attention, right? Because we're still providing that attention to that student or that child. Tangible. Some examples could be getting the iPad at the restaurant to stop crying, or access to your favorite snack after a tantrum. And sensory could look like scripting your favorite movie. We might have students that love to just script and talk about a movie. That's sensory. No one else has to talk with them. They might just like to talk about the movie by themselves. Spinning around in circles, or even singing in the shower, right? You do that because it feels good to you. Doesn't matter if anyone can hear you sometimes. Just because it feels good to you, you're going to continue to do it. All right, so let's look back at those ABC data collection instances that we looked at earlier. Now that we know the 4 functions, what do we think the functions of these 2 instances would be? The first one, what do we think? You guys can put in the chat if you want. Yep. Great job. The first one is attention, because they get that one-on-one pair attention. They're like, hey, if I just rip up my worksheet, the pair is going to come and tell me, she's going to sit right here next to me. She's going to talk to me. She's going to calm me down. And she probably does my worksheet with me. So I don't make sure I don't rip it up again. What about the second one? Great job. Escape. Yeah, cry. You can do it tomorrow. It's okay. I'll make sure you're calm, right? So they're like, man, if I might just keep doing this, right? Keep it crying. Every time mom tells me I have to clean my room, I'm just going to cry. And if I cry for 10 minutes, she's probably going to tell me I get to do it tomorrow. And then maybe I'll just do it all over again tomorrow, right? So if we continue to see that behavior happening, then that could be going back to our functions of what's maintaining it. All right. So we have already gone over so much in this quick presentation already. So let's recap. So right now, we know what an IEP is. We know what an FBA assessment is, how to create it, and it's used to create a BIP, right? We also know that there's multiple ways to measure behavior. And we also know that there's 4 functions of behavior. So now let's come back to just the IEP for 1 minute. So we mentioned that there's guidelines for where the student is and kind of where we want them to be, whether that's a timeline of the 9 weeks or the end of the school year, but that IEP is going to have goals, but so will a BIP. So our next thing we're going to talk about is creating the IEP and the BIP goals. The biggest thing is, what's the difference? Sometimes people are like, aren't they the same thing? Right? They're in the same document. They might be the same thing. That's not true, right? So IEP goals are used for behaviors we want to increase. So what are those replacement goals that we want to teach them? We want to teach them how to sit in their seat, right? We want to increase that. We want to increase the amount of times they raise the hand instead of shouting out, right? It's those behaviors that we want to increase. BIP goals are for behaviors we want to decrease. And a rule of thumb is for every BIP goal, there should be an IEP goal. Because remember, we don't want to just decrease the behavior without teaching the student the more appropriate replacement behavior. So for every BIP goal, there should be an IEP goal, but not necessarily backwards, right? So not necessarily will there be an IEP goal for every, an IEP goal for every BIP goal, but a BIP goal for every IEP goal. Does that make sense? So let me recap. That might be confusing. For every BIP goal, there should be an IEP goal, but there will not be a BIP goal for every IEP goal. All right. Let's see. So I'm going to read this example of an IEP goal. So by the end of the 22-23 school year, Bobby will ask for a break by vocally saying, I need a break, to a staff member as needed throughout the school day with a 90% accuracy for 4 consecutive days. This will be measured with frequency data. So the behavior we're wanting to increase right now is the I need a break. I want him to vocally say, I need a break. But the BIP goal that could be corresponding with that is Bobby will decrease his elopement from the classroom and or building by 75% by the end of the 22-23 school year. So we want to increase I need a break, but decrease the elopement. All right, so do we see the difference there and how one's increase, one's decrease? So recap in the chat. We just went over this, so this should be really fresh. IEP goals are used for behaviors we want to what? Increase. And BIP goals are used for behaviors we want to decrease. Great job, guys. Yep, increase and decrease. All right, so how do we write those IEP goals? What are some of the components we want to look at when we're writing the IEP goal? I'm going to go through the list of the components, and then we're going to break them down after. So I'm going to kind of go quickly through this slide, but I promise we're going to break it down with some examples. So the first component is time frame. Second is the assessment condition, the target behavior, support needed, criteria, and the measurement. So for the time frame, I want you to ask yourself, when do I want the mastery of this goal to be obtained by? What's a reasonable timeline, right? What's that time frame? So some questions could be, or some examples could be, by the end of the academic school year, by the end of the 9-week period, by the end of the 22-23 school year. This is also going to be change depending on your school, what program you guys use to write IEP goals, and depending on how you guys do the grading system or like the IEP meetings, and like every school system kind of does it a little bit different. So some of them do it by 9 weeks, some of them do it by just the year or the quarter. So just keep that in mind, but there should be a time frame in your goal of some sort. All right, the question I want you to ask yourself for assessment condition is, under which condition will the expected behavior need to be performed? So when presented with a difficult task, that's a good example. During whole group math instruction, maybe based on your those observations that you did or those assessments that you did to kind of get the current performance of the student, maybe you notice that he only needs more support in math or only needs more support in reading. So you might make it more individualized when it comes to that kind of instruction. Or during social skills instruction. For target behavior, ask yourself, what behavior do we want to increase, right? This is an IEP goal, so we want to increase it. Student will request a break from schoolwork. Student will appropriately ask for help. Student will appropriately seek peer attention. So that is just part of that definition or the goal that is specific to the target behavior. Support needed. You're going to ask yourself, what support, if any, will be needed to support this student meeting the goal successfully? So here we're going to look at kind of more prompt levels. So do we think that he can actually perform independently if we teach him how to do that? It could be. So the goal could be, we want to make sure he can do it independently by the end of the school year. Maybe we think that he just needs one vocal reminder. Or maybe he needs some physical prompting with this goal, whatever the goal might be. So we could say no more than 2 partial physical prompts, or it could be a vocal prompt, anything like that. We can kind of judge that, and it should be individualized per each student. Criteria. So I want you to ask yourself how much or how often the behavior must be displayed to consider it mastered. So maybe you took baseline data. Maybe your original data, he was performing at maybe a 50% accuracy. You can include that in the goal and say, we want him to go from 50 to 80. Or you see the 80% a lot. So you could say just at least 80% of the instructional periods, right? Maybe we're not going to take data on recess or lunch, but maybe every academic period, we're going to take data on it. Or 8 out of 10 peer interactions. So that frequency of how many peer interactions, that could be what is calculated in the data. And the last one for IEP goals is measurement. So how will this goal be measured? And we kind of talked about some of the measurement systems that you can use. So you could say, as measured weekly during 2 20-minute direct observations. So there's that time, there's that interval, right? Measured weekly by IEP data sheets. Some school systems already have their IEP data sheets for that student, and it's very organized in that way. Or maybe you create your own, and that's where you take data. You can state what document you take data on. And you could just do it daily by frequency counts. So you can even name the actual measurement system. So now let's practice putting it all together. So I'm going to kind of put it in chart form. I'm very much a visual person, and I want to kind of show this in chart form to kind of see how you could create and put all of those components together. So you have your components, right? Time frame, assessment condition, target behavior, support needed, criteria, and measurement. You have the questions to ask yourself that we just went through, and you have some of the samples that we just talked about. And now, if we take all of those sample goals, right? Those sample language, right? All those different phrases, we already broke them up, but if we put them together, now you have a fully completed goal. So let's read it together. By the end of the 2022-2023 academic school year, when presented with a difficult task, Bobby will appropriately ask for help when provided with no more than 2 partial vocal prompts for at least 80% of the independent classwork time as measured daily by frequency counts. So we simply took every little piece and just put them all together like a one big sandwich, and we made one completed IEP goal. Pretty cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about BIP goals. So we, again, just like IEP, there's some components that we're going to talk about. Again, behaviors is defining those behaviors that we want to decrease, right? And we know that the behaviors are going to be different for every student. My profanity might look a lot different than Bobby's profanity. My aggression might look a lot different than Sally's aggression, right? So we have to be specific. We have to be so precise that if I write a goal as a teacher or as a BCBA, and I give it to a teacher or I give it to a parent, say, hey, here's in the IEP, here's in the BIP what I want to write. I want them to be able to say, I know exactly what behavior you're taking data on, right? We want to make sure it's consistent and it looks the same. So we know when you see it, I see it, where our data is completely consistent throughout the board. Be objective. Make sure you use measurable and observable terms. Avoid using the perceived intent or even motivation behind it, because that sometimes isn't even observable. You might say that he's angry, but how do you know he's angry, right? We might not know that unless he vocally says, I'm angry, leave me alone. That's more subjective. So we have to make sure that we are being as objective as possible and we are taking data on what we actually see. Be detailed. Provide all the examples, all the non-examples, all the phrases, all the actions that you might see in that tantrum, in that profanity, in that aggressive outburst, right? We want to make sure that we include it all. So we're like, yep, that counts. Frequency, putting a tally mark, right? So what does it look like? Be detailed. Include those examples and non-examples. So if it's elopement, make sure that a non-example could be not when you guys are playing hide and seek, right? Because that would be more appropriate. That's actually the name of the game. Hide and seek, run, right? Include the beginning and the end. So when does the behavior start and when does it end? This is also known for some of the teachers. You guys might see onset, offset. It's the onset of the behavior. Offset is the same thing, beginning and end. Be observable. So make sure you are describing the behavior in a measurable and observable terms. And then also include the measurement. So just like the IEP goal, we want to also include the measurement system that we're going to use as well. It's extremely important to take that data, because if we're not taking the data from the beginning to the end, we won't know if the behavior is actually changing based on that intervention that we put into place. So now let's check out some examples. So I'm going to look at elopement really quick. So elopement, if this was the definition in yellow, leaving the classroom when mad. This is something that you could see at home or in school. Let's use those 7 components that we just went through, and let's kind of do like a self-audit of this behavior goal. So elopement is leaving the classroom when mad. So here's our 7 components. Let's go through each one and kind of see if it follows in line with what it should have. It's not specific. It's definitely not detailed. Does not have examples. There's no non-examples. There's no beginning and end. There's no measurement system. I would say it is observable because I can actually observe Bobby leaving the classroom, but it's not objective because mad is kind of subjective. How do we know that he's mad, right? So how can we rewrite it? So we know leaving the classroom when mad is not an example, but we could write it as leaving a designated area more than 3 feet without permission. This includes leaving their desk when it is time to do work with math without the teacher's permission. A non-example would include going to the counselor with permission from a staff or even playing hide and seek. And it will have an immediate onset and offset. So the moment he leaves the classroom to the moment that he comes back, that will be the duration. So we're going to use duration as the measurement. So I know we just went through a lot, and I want everyone to take a deep breath because I know it was just a lot of information. We went over a lot of detail, a lot of lists. You guys will have the recording of this, so definitely take your screenshots. But I really wanted to end today by just to the teachers and the staff, the school staff, do an audit. Take a look at your processes, audit your IEP goals now that you have those components, audit those BIP goals. What are your current measuring systems? What are those processing looking like? Are they need to be improved? Are they looking like there might be some gaps, right? You guys are these students' advocates. So this is kind of a good spot to say, hey, let's see how our program is. Let's see where we can improve on. We all need improvement. Always. We're always growing. We're always learning. And to the parents and to the caregivers, hopefully today I gave you some tools, even some verbiage, some kind of those acronyms. Now you have a better understanding. And now you feel more confident walking back into that next IEP meeting where you feel confident to ask some of the tough questions, right? You can ask for that data. You can ask for, hey, you said the function was attention. How did you come up with that? Right? You can also ask for the data. You can ask for the continuing progress. That is something that you have the right to do as the parent guardian, and you are your child's biggest advocate. So I just hope that this meeting or this webinar, this presentation really made you feel more confident in that. So thank you guys for your time. I think I ended right at 50 minutes, but I would love to stay connected with you guys. So go to Atlanta Behavior Academy, find us on Instagram, and then I've also provided my email here as well, in case you have any questions or anything like that after today.
That was fantastic, Mackenzie. Thank you. So for some of you who are here today that I've been assisting with some of the school struggles, Mackenzie is one of the people that I go to when having questions about, this goal doesn't look right to me, or this is how they wrote the behavior plan, but I'm not seeing the data to go with it. And she helps me with some of those things as well. So she has been a tremendous resource to me personally. So thank you for that. Again, throw some questions in the Q&A. We do have one. So Sarah's asking, the teachers in the IEP team are already supposed to know all of these things, correct?
Yes, you guys should. And also I feel like, again, every school system does it a little bit different. So your process might be a little bit different, and that's okay. But yes, I would definitely look at your school, those processes. But yes, most of the time, I would say you guys should be aware of all of this.
One of the things I was hoping you can touch base on really quickly, Mackenzie, is the programs for BIPs and IEPs where teachers or the school psychologist is forced to select from a drop down rather than be able to free write a goal the way that we would prefer it to be written. How do we address that?
Yeah, so love that you asked that question, Stacy. We see that a lot, that there's a lot of drop downs. And like we see one that's like bad language. Well, that's very subjective. It probably should say profanity or things like that. How we've addressed it and kind of how I would say for you guys to just advocate for your students. So if there's something that is not appropriate or in the drop down, or you don't feel like it should be there, I'd pick the best option, but then I would also have documentation of here is actually what I had to choose. Like I had no choice, but here's how what I'm actually going to be taking data on. And again, I'm not saying like you're going to take data on like aggression versus elopement, right? But you might not have the opportunity to be as descriptive as possible or things like that. So I would definitely just bring that up in the IEP meeting, and just document that you have let someone know that you don't think that it fits well with this. But on your end, for your documentation, for your legal purposes, as long as you have data on the behavior that is listed in the IEP or BIP, you should be fine. So if an attorney ever walked into your room and said, let me have your data, you could properly show that. That's really all that matters.
Great, thank you. For our PWS kids who have extremely slow transition times between classes or even activities within the classroom, would you suggest creating a BIP goal for this?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I definitely would.
And how would you word something like that? Because what we want to do is decrease the time. So what would be perhaps an appropriate IEP goal then of a skill that we're increasing?
Okay, so what exactly would you be observing? Can you give me like an example?
I would say probably the duration of how long it takes for that transition to actually take place. So going from one area in the classroom to the next, or we see a lot in the elementary schools going from the classroom to a therapy room, where that transition takes so much time that in some cases it's cutting into the minutes of service.
Yeah, for sure. So I think definitely document, definitely take data. It definitely should be where you have baseline data, like kind of that one example where it was like 50% to 80% or something like that, but decrease. So even writing like more of like, hey, this is how long it's taking on average. This is where we kind of want him to be. So even if it takes him 5 minutes longer, that's easy. That's better than 20 minutes, right? So like even having a decrease like that. But I think some replacement behaviors could be using timers, priming them. So like, Bobby, we're going to go to speech in 20 minutes. Bobby, we're going to go to speech in 15 minutes, right? Just having that priming, that could be simply what they need. Or it could be like, oh, the speech therapist came in. Oh, he's here. All right, it's going to be done in 2 minutes, right? In the presence of the speech therapist there might help. I don't know. Depends on the student. But yeah, some of those replacement behaviors of just that priming, the antecedent interventions there would be pretty impactful, probably.
Great, thank you. One more question in the chat. So I'm really struggling with what to ask for academically. Not sure where my student should be with reading, math, etc. As an almost 9th grader, he's currently working at a preschool level.
Okay. I would look back on your assessments. I would maybe even redo some of them. The biggest one for even the preschool level is the VB map. Even start, if that's where you feel that he is currently performing, start with that one. And then try and build up and kind of see where to go. It also could be the mode of communication. So even though they are vocally able to communicate, maybe in certain situations they don't feel like they want to. So even providing multiple ways to communicate, we've also seen a change. So even in certain settings, he might be really talkative, but then when you ask him a yes or no question, he kind of pauses. So even providing like a yes and no card or something like that, I would definitely do that. But the first thing is probably to look at those assessments. It's probably going to end with a reevaluation, but definitely look back on those assessments for sure.
Great, thank you. And I know we're short on time, so one more question if you have the time.
Yeah, of course.
Any specific primer suggestions for middle school or high school students who are concerned about being embarrassed with the use of timers?
Ooh, I would try one to see when you use the timer. Why do you want to use the timer? So kind of do like a self audit for that for yourself. But then if a timer is definitely necessary and needs to be used, either do whole class timers or do something that is a reinforcer for that student in particularly. So like I have seen where the parents have actually gotten like a special watch for the student. And so like he thinks it's cool, so he'll use it on there. And so we kind of prompt him like, hey, start your timer, 5 minutes, right? And he thinks it's cool. So he's like, I'll definitely use this. But if it's more of the embarrassment aspect, definitely use either a whole class or something preferred, like a watch or cell phone or something like that.
Donna just made a great point. She asked if a cell phone could be used for students.
Yeah.
I think that I have seen it used in some schools, in the high school setting with a very small classroom where all the students are taught how to set the timers in their phone. And then they all have different things that they're setting the timers for, but it became a very normalized activity in that setting. I would imagine that probably is very school specific.
It is. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are out of time. Mackenzie, thank you so much. I so appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.
As we mentioned earlier, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel and on our website at a later date, along with Mackenzie's slides. Does include her contact information, so please reach out to her should you want to continue your conversation. All right. Thank you so much, Mackenzie.
Thank you.